Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I always like the smell of the ramp, rubber, jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, wet concrete, because it meant the world was moving. Even at 2 a.m., I ran nights for Northport Ground at John F. Kennedy International, mostly on bag belts and dollies, sometimes guiding a tug when a lead trusted me. My badge got me through the side at checkpoints and out onto the air operations area where the blue runway edge lights looked like constellations laid flat. On good nights, you learned the patterns. The same cargo ramps breathing, the same belly doors yawning open, the same clicks over the handset from ramp control. The only wild card was the call that started it all. Special cargo, reassignment, temporary duty in a hangar we didn't use because it was under renovation last month. They told us to bring gloves, hearing protection, and patience. We crossed under an overpass lined with high-mast lights and rolled toward a hangar on the far side of the field, away from the passenger terminals, past fuel farms, and a long blast fence that hummed in the wind. It was marked H-14 on the map in Ops, a big corrugated shell with newly stenciled numbers and two hangar doors that could swallow a narrow body hole. Portable negative pressure scrubbers throbbed at one end. Plastic sheeting made clear lanes inside. Folding cots were stacked by the dozens. The floor had been taped into zones with yellow and black hazard stripes. Someone had paid to make this look official in a hurry. Our lead, Annika Patel, met us at the pedestrian airlock with a clipboard and a voice hoarse from hours on the radio. Northport crew, good. You're on containment and logistics. No aircraft handling. Keep the lanes clear. Water and blankets are on pallet B. Lap belts, tie-down straps, and traffic cones are in the cage. Stay out of the red zone unless a supervisor waves you in. That's CDC and CBP space. I ran with Kenny Ross, who knew every bolt shortcut around the field. He had that grinning patience the ramp gives you. Nothing's ever on schedule, so you learn to breathe differently. Rosa Lee, our forklift artist, swung a hister around like it was a bicycle. Two Port Authority officers watched us from the entry vestibule, hand radios clipped to their armor, politely trying not to look nervous. In the red zone, a CDC physician in a white Tyvek suit, name strip read Chowdhury, conferred with a CBP supervisor and a man from Airport Ops who kept rubbing a laminate of the emergency plan like it was a lucky coin. The plan looked too glossy, too clean. We staged water, unboxed thermal blankets, and ran tape along the floor to route traffic from air stairs to reception. The hangar smelled like plastic, bleach, and cold metal. Someone had rolled in portable lav units, parked them behind a screen near a wall of tool cages, sockets, torque wrenches, a couple of rescue axes you usually only see mounted inside jet bridges. There were also crash carts with defibrillators, their green lights winking. I kept moving because standing still made the noise from the scrubbers find its way under my skin. By 3:10, ramp control handed the frequency to Ops for a few minutes. A wide body from overseas had called Medical Mid-Atlantic. That's all they'd tell us. The captain followed instructions to taxi to a remote stand and then towed straight here. No terminal, no jet bridge. Fewer eyes, I thought, and more controllable doors. It made a kind of sense that kept me from thinking about why I'd been reassigned to special cargo when I was more useful outside with a tug. The aircraft rolled to a stop just after 3:30. We heard the tow tractor first, a low diesel growl that vibrated the hangar floor. The flight number showed up on a dry erase board behind the CDC team, TA 417, transatlantic, inbound from Warsaw with a planned stop at Heathrow that never happened. The plane's APU wound down as a ground power cart took the load. My job, Kenny's job, Rosa's job, and 3 others. Make sure the path from the crew door to intake stood clear. Set cones at the marked distances, keep passengers from pushing through to the equipment side. The CBP folks with blue windbreakers adjusted their masks, and the Port Authority officers spaced out in pairs along the path. They brought the air stairs up, locked pins through rail sockets, checked the angle twice. Dr. Chowdhury raised her radio and nodded to the flight crew. We all braced without knowing what brace looked like in this context. When the door cracked open, all I saw was light, warm cabin light spilling over cold aluminum. Then sound hit us like a whine. Coughing, urgent voices in a dozen accents, someone speaking to someone else with a patience they no longer had. The first people down the stairs looked like any overnight flight, rumpled, pale from poor sleep, but their movements were off. They blinked against the hangar light and pressed hands to railings like the ground was moving under them. A few wore masks from the seat pocket. One man in a suit reached the concrete and went to his knees smooth, as if he planned to kneel. He stayed that way until a nurse knelt with him and coaxed him to sit. 2 teens helped a woman who couldn't seem to let go of her carry-on bag. A middle-aged guy kept his eyes closed while he walked and clutched his phone with both hands as if it were a talisman. People were sick, yes, but still very much themselves. They were so relieved to be somewhere that wasn't a sealed aluminum tube that their relief worked on me like sedative. Then the dynamic changed. Some passengers came down fast, movements jerky like they'd stood too long and locked up their knees. A boy stopped halfway and stared at the hangar floor the way you look at a high ledge. A CBP officer gently urged him onward with 2 fingers and a soft voice. A woman in a long cardigan whispered to no one I could see. The CDC team sorted people into symptomatic and monitor lanes, a clean choreography ruined by the sheer press of bodies and fear. We kept space open, repeated Annika's lines about water and blankets and patience. The negative air machines whirred louder, pushing indoor air through filters as if volume were protection. I kept my eyes on the exits in the big hangar doors, a habit from years of thinking about tow routes and equipment traffic. Those doors were our sky, the only opening big enough to matter. I knew their crank mechanisms and the padlock holes for wind locks. I also knew the smaller pedestrian man doors along the sidewalls and the roll-up equipment door with a bent slat that never fully sealed. This was a space you could hold if you had to, and maybe that's why someone selected it. Hold the space, hold the problem. 2 hours in, patience ran out. There are limits to people, even kind ones. A passenger near the front of a line spun toward the nearest authority figure and asked, voice steady but too loud, when they could call family. Another asked to leave because his connecting flight would be missed. A grandmother asked to sit somewhere warmer. A young woman folded over a trash bin with a kind of dry, wrenching motion that made everyone within 10 feet take a half step away. Dr. Chowdhury's team rearranged lanes. CBP set their shoulders and kept voices calm. I crossed to the cage to drag out 2 more stacks of bottled water. Rosa had already prepped them with box cutters, and when I looked back, a man was on the floor. Not collapsed, on the floor, eyes open and locked, jaw clenched. 3 people turned toward him, then turned away. The hesitation was the loudest thing I'd heard all night. We had airport medics on standby. They moved like a pilot at minimums. All checklists, no wasted motion. They set an airway, counted under their breath, called for a defibrillator. He came back to a thin, ragged breath, then a shallow rhythm that made the medic nod. They rolled him to the side in a practiced move to protect him from himself and from anyone trying to help too much. It was the kind of scene that makes you grateful some people make this their job. I breathed easier. A person can't hold fear in their chest forever. Something had to give, and for a few minutes it gave in the right direction. Port Authority made their announcement around dawn. The sun hadn't broken the horizon, but the threshold was pink, and you could see the airport thinking about first light. An officer we hadn't seen before, rank stripes, a command voice without shouting, stepped onto a rolling work platform and spoke through a bullhorn that gave everything the flat tone of a drill. "Inbound orders, out of our hands," he said. "Temporary containment. Doors were secured until the federal team finished assessment. No one in or out. We'd have supplies and communications, and any personal emergencies would be handled promptly." He said temporary twice, the second time softer, which made it feel longer. I looked at the hangar doors and saw something I didn't know I'd been tracking. Shiny new chains on the exterior latches we couldn't touch from inside. The equipment door's bent slat was jammed with a piece of angle iron I hadn't put there. The pedestrian man doors had been flipped to locked from the outside. Bolts slid through, cap set. I felt the hangar get smaller by half. We kept working because the way to stay upright on a ramp is to keep moving, and because if you stop to think about things like doors you can't open, you might sit down and not get back up. It wasn't the chains that changed the room. It was sound. A noise has to be both loud and odd to cut through a hangar, and this noise did. It came from the red zone side, past the intake path, near the bleachers we'd set for people who needed to sit in groups. It started like a cough that had turned into a shout, then became a long, raw vowel that curved up at the end. People turned as one toward it, the way flocks will turn, and the way they turned made me grip the handle of the pallet jack hard enough to feel the metal indent my palm. "Move," Annika said to no one and everyone, and we moved. What we saw was not a movie. It was an interpretation error in human motion. The man who'd been revived was upright in a way that suggested someone had pulled him up with strings. His head tilted like he was reading a sign on the ceiling. The nurse who'd been with him had her hands raised, palms out, words steady. "You're okay. Sit down. Breathe. You're okay." He moved toward her without looking at her, a step that was too far and too direct, accepting no friction from the small items on the floor that would normally catch a foot. The nurse moved left. He moved with her like a shadow. The Port Authority officer closest to them took half a step and placed himself the way we'd practiced during unruly passenger drills. Feet planted, hands ready, body turned at an angle, voice authoritative but not provocative. "Sir, I need you to—" Then there was the fastest kind of motion, the kind you don't have words for because words take longer than the thing you're trying to describe. The officer and the nurse went down together under the man's weight, not with the sharp sounds of a fight, but with the heavy kinetic noise of equipment tipping. Training is what people do when they've planned for a day. Instinct is what you do when you've learned there won't be one. 3 of us were moving before thought. We didn't attack, and we didn't engage. We lifted, pulled, wedged. I grabbed a traffic cone and put it between moving bodies. Rosa slid a rolling ladder between the man and the nearest cluster like a moving fence. Kenny, who should have been a firefighter, put his knee where a hinge-like joint would slow motion in any body, put gentle weight on it, and spoke with a calm I hadn't heard even in quiet. "Easy, slow, sir, slow." The nurse's eyes found mine through her face shield. Unhurt, breathing, focused. The officer's radio had spilled on the floor and was loudly asking, "Unit status?" We didn't injure anyone. That's a point I make here because this is still an airport and those words keep their weight. We separated people, used straps like soft barriers, and cleared space. Then it happened again in a different corner with a different passenger who looked to the right of whoever was talking to him and moved as if drawn by a magnet housed in whatever was beyond the person's shoulder. The CDC team adjusted their posture, one hand ready to steady, one open to signal, and began saying new things into their radios with new cadences. I heard the word neuro, and then the word cluster, and then a string of numbers that gave this a data shape. It helped until it didn't. The hangar had a behavioral map now. One area was calm, one was unsettled, one was a place you didn't go without someone at your shoulder. We reorganized like a pit crew. Rosa stacked AKE cans too high to form a waist-high barrier with the doors popped open for pass-through if needed. We used cargo nets on PMC pallets to make movable screens. I borrowed a pair of marshalling wands and used them like bright beacons to show people where to walk. The infected, by then that's what we were calling them on our internal channel because people need labels to hang actions on, followed noise and motion in a kind of delayed echo. If you sped up, they sped up. If you slowed, some slowed. It wasn't consistent, and inconsistency is as dangerous as speed. By late morning, the radios weren't dependable. Inside the hangar, we had too much metal for clear signals, and outside was chaos on frequencies that were normally procedural poetry. A news helicopter bucked a pattern above the blast fence until ATC sent it on, and a second one replaced it. Sirens ran the service roads like rainwater. The big doors stayed chained. The public address system chirped once and fell silent. CBP corralled a group that had decided to test the pedestrian exit en masse. Rosy-cheeked airline reps who'd come to help pivoted to making lists of names and room assignments while their voices tried to be reassuring. A passenger near the bleachers started singing very softly. A second joined him. The melody made sense to them and to me because it had a beat you could step to. I anchored to that beat. We did a lightning conference by the tool cages. It wasn't a meeting because meetings run on time and this ran on a second hand. Anika looked at each of us the way good leads do when they need to know what you have left. Kenny's answer was simple: we build. Rosa's was simpler: we lift. Mine was we map. If we couldn't leave, we had to make inside safer. That meant barricades that did not look like barricades, because a barricade becomes a target for anyone who feels trapped. It meant lanes that gently steered behavior instead of demanding it. It meant distributed supplies so there would be no single point to charge. We used the field. A hangar is inventory and void. We filled the void with structure. A line of dollies became a soft spine across the floor. ULDs perched like vertebrae. The straps turned into gates that could be popped in an instant. Belt loaders parked at angles made funnels that eased people into wider space. We took the wheels off 3 baggage carts to make anchors you couldn't shift without tools. Every choice had a second purpose. If we had to move fast later, nothing would trap us. If we had to hold, everything would help. Rationing started. Water we had, but cups were limited, and people needed to be reminded to keep distance even when thirsty. Blankets went to the very young and very old first. Someone had packed protein bars, the chalky kind that taste like good intentions, and they went into hands with thank yous attached. The lav units began to feel like a ship's heads, monitored by a CBP officer with a humor so dry it evaporated every argument. A small boy of about 6 clutched a toy airplane with a broken wing until a mechanic named Gus broke out epoxy and a heat gun and fixed it well enough that the boy nodded once, solemn, like he understood the contract that had just been made. That quiet moment made everything feel possible again for a handful of minutes. And then the infection changed tempo. Not just more people showing signs, a different pattern in how it took them. They went still first, like listening, and in the stillness they seemed to locate whoever or whatever had made the most motion or noise in the last 30 seconds. Then they would move toward it with directness that knocked aside anything in the way. One passenger moved into a clump of folding chairs with such blunt determination that the chairs gave, and the metal folded the wrong way. He didn't care about pain, or didn't register it, and the lack of feedback made my stomach drop. The CDC team radioed for additional PPE they did not receive. Port Authority requested guidance he could not get. The chain outside might as well have been a mountain. We rotated our crew every 20 minutes because adrenaline lies about time. Kenny kept count with the chalk on the floor. Rosa drove the forklift like a chess player, blocking lines of approach with a gentle arcs and then backing away before she became a target. I found myself speaking to people about small things: how to tuck a blanket, how to stand to rest your back, where to stare when your eyes wanted to flick to every motion, because small things were the only things we could control. I wondered about my own family in Queens, about whether my mom's building management had posted signs yet, about whether I'd be the one to explain why I didn't come home. That thought cracked something inside me. I patched it with work. We tried to open the doors once around noon. Not a jailbreak, not a run. An engineering attempt. The main hangar doors had interior racks for locking pins. The new chains weren't connected to those pins, but looped through steel hasps welded to the outside track stops. You could see the shadow of the padlock bodies through the seam. Kenny proposed a loop trick. Feed a cargo strap through the seam, wrap the padlock body, and use a tug to generate enough force to shear either the lock or the hasp. It was the kind of field idea I love because it used what we had and targeted the weak link. We set it up with quiet hands and 3 lookouts because if it worked, everything would change. We fed the strap with a fiberglass fish tape used for pulling wire, a thing I never thought would matter on the ramp. We got the strap around something solid and heard it click around metal. The tug idled, then growled as Kenny eased it forward millimeter by millimeter. The strap stretched and sang. Everything creaked. The door groaned. The AKE cans rattled. One of the chains popped tight, and the noise it made was a voice. Not this way. We lost the strap when it snapped and cut a bright line across the floor before it recoiled into the seam. Kenny killed the tug and sat perfectly still in the silence that followed. No one cursed. We didn't have time for that. We rolled everything back like the world hadn't noticed. By mid-afternoon, we were an island. The airport around us was still an airport. Planes moved at the far end of the field, fuel trucks glided, red beacons blinked. But inside, H14 time was something you could measure only by the angle of sunlight through high windows. Folks who had arrived early were tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Folks who had arrived later were angry in a way talking doesn't cool. The infected were more numerous and less predictable. We learned a trick: white noise. If we ran a vacuum and parked it in a corner, they were drawn to it like iron filings to a magnet, clustering without coordination. We put 2 vacuums on timers and moved them every 20 minutes. It wasn't much, but it gave us lanes. Food, water, air, exit, that's the simple list. Food we could stretch. Water we could manage. Air we had in spades. Those scrubbers could push a gale. Exit we did not have. That left comms. I grabbed an unused push-to-talk set to an internal maintenance channel and tried to build a link between that and my phone, which had only intermittent signal. Messages out vanished like breath on a visor. Messages in came in bursts. My sister asking if the news about the airport thing was my airport. My mom sending 3 praying hands. A friend from another shift saying the terminal had been cleared and then uncleared twice because guidance kept changing. I recorded a 30-second voice note. I'm in a contained hangar. I'm okay. I'm with the team. We're doing what we can. Stay home. Stay smart. And sent it to everyone I'd ever texted. The little sent checkmark hung there like a decision a stranger would make later. We had a window of quiet near sunset. Even outbreaks have circadian rhythms. The infected movement slowed like the floor had become sticky. People who still felt like themselves drew closer, not to huddle, but to share space. We took inventory the old-fashioned way, eyes on shelves, fingers on counts. Rosa found a pack of bolt cutters under a pile of welding blankets and raised them like a trophy. The cutters were heavy enough that I felt hopeful just holding them. We tested them on scrap chain. They bit, but you had to commit. The problem remained. Everything we needed to cut was outside. Unless it wasn't. "Baggage tunnel," I said, and Kenny's head tilted like a dog hearing an ultrasonic whistle. He grinned without humor. "If the hangar's old enough, yeah. A feeder belt might run under to the old HS line. They covered most of those, but not always." We moved carefully, the infected mapped to motion. We would be predators in reverse, small, patient, avoiding notice. I took one person from each group that had been working together all day. Kenny for mechanical and rope work, Rosa for power and lift, Gus for maintenance tricks, and a Port Authority officer named Bennett, who had the kind of face that calms people. Dr. Chowdhury pressed a bag into my hands. Basic trauma kit, gloves, a couple of N95s. She didn't say, "Don't be a hero." She didn't need to. The baggage area was a maze of roller beds, empty tubs, and old signs with arrows to places that no longer existed. We knew the smell: rubber dust and stale air. The belt system we wanted would have been sealed years ago, but sealed means something different to carpenters than it does to desperate rampers. We found a grating near the equipment side, a rectangle of steel set into concrete, the edges caked with paint and sealant. The bolts were old enough that the wrench slipped twice before biting. Kenny clipped a tie down to the grating and we gave it tension with a tug until it lifted a fraction of an inch and then came free with a crack that sounded like a door slamming in another room. The air that came up wasn't fresh, but it wasn't manufactured either. Below, a crawl space that widened into a tunnel, big enough for a person with a pack to move, not big enough for a dolly. It ran toward the older terminal side, then bent under a service corridor we could trace on a map in our minds. We sent light down and saw dust motes spin like snow. We listened for sound and heard a distant hum that could have been anything. Fans, generators, the field itself. The question wasn't whether it went somewhere. It was whether somewhere was better than here. The first step was to test air. Gus had a handheld gas monitor he'd pocketed out of habit. He waved it slowly, watching the readout like it was a sunrise. Oxygen normal, nothing dramatic on the other numbers. We rigged a safety line, spare static rope from a maintenance cage, and tied off to a forklift. We marked the entry with the reflective tape and chalked an arrow so big no one could mistake it. We explained to Anika that this wasn't an evacuation yet. It was reconnaissance. She looked at us, not to stop us, but to absorb the risk so we didn't have to carry it alone. That's what good leads do too. I went first because I'd been the one to say the word. It wasn't noble. It was so I could stop making pictures in my head of my mom waiting at the apartment window. The tunnel took me on hands and knees for the first 20 feet, then let me crouch walk. I counted my breaths because that was more useful than counting feet. The concrete ceiling had carved initials and dates, old workers marking time, then newer spray paint in safety orange that read, "HS line, do not block." The rope tugged at my waist gently, a reminder that I belonged to a line of people. I reached a grate that had been replaced at some point. It wasn't welded, it was bolted with big washers. I put my ear to it. Above, a space breathed differently from the hangar. I heard rolling wheels, then voices, then silence, then a tone from a device I didn't recognize. Not infected, not agitated. I radioed back in a whisper and got white noise. Then Kenny's voice, shaven syllables to save decibels. We made the bolts turn one at a time, slow enough that the metal didn't ring. A slice of new air spilled into the tunnel, carrying the smell of floor cleaner and something fried. I thought of food for the first time in hours. My stomach reminded me I'd had 3 bites of a bar and too much coffee. We lifted the grate enough to look. We were under a service corridor. A sterile hallway of white panels, pale non-slip floor, stainless steel carts parked in a row. A keypad by a door blinked at a slow, steady rate. A sign read, "Authorized personnel only." We weren't authorized, but we were personnel of a sort, and that counted to me. The hallway was empty. The center of the airport might be panicking, but this hallway was a blank slate. We had to get people from a hot hangar into this corridor without waking the entire hangar behind us. That meant planning the path back through H-14 with noise discipline, decoys, and timing. It also meant picking who would go first. The rule was simple. Those who could walk easily and help would go first with a child or someone older at their side. Those who were ill but stable would go next with medics. Those who were not safe to move would be secured and monitored with every resource left. There was no perfect solution. The first thing you learn on the ramp is that perfect solutions are uppercase words for the manual. The ramp itself speaks lowercase and accepts trade-offs. We set out in small files, each group 5 people, 10 meters apart, roped together loosely so no one panicked when the lights flickered. Rosa took the forklift to the far end and ran a cycle of lifting and lowering pallets to draw the infected like iron filings. Kenny moved a portable fan on a caster and let it thrum. I walked to the path we'd chalked with a marshalling wand dimmed under my jacket, a firefly for only those near me. We passed close to 3 people who had become something like amplifiers for movement. Their eyes tracked the residue of where we'd been instead of where we were. Every time we slid past, I felt time stretch like gum, thin and sticky. At the tunnel, the transition felt like a ritual. People knelt, turned, and slid into a new part of the airport as if descending into a subway. Officer Bennett worked the rope like a belayer, hands sure, voice quiet. Gus talked anyone who faltered through the physics of the space. You fit because the space was built for a person. You breathe because the air is moving. You go because you can. Dr. Chowdhury took the second group through herself. A nurse in front and one behind. And I loved her for that, privately, the way you love small acts of courage that could have been delegated. The third group did make the turn cleanly. A sound at the far end spiked. Someone dropped a metal water jug, and 2 infected near the intake path moved toward the echo and then toward us, because echoes have parents. We'd planned for that with a rolling barrier, dollies, ULD cans, and a welded bar strapped together. Kenny and I nudged it into place with knees and hips. It wasn't a wall, but it was friction. The first infected hit the barrier and climbed, but climbing has rhythm, and we could interrupt it by shifting the structure every time his back foot sought purchase. Officer Bennett stepped into the rhythm and leaned, awkward and brave. The infected reached, fingers seeking leverage, and I saw, just for a moment, the ring on his hand, plain metal, and thought of the person who'd put it there. That thought kept me from freezing. We didn't strike anyone. That is a second point I make clearly. We moved and blocked and braced and then disengaged. We circled to the belt loader, guided it slowly with the battery humming, and let its moving belt become a distraction that pulled 2 more infected like moths. We backed it away again gently. We were tricksters in a place that liked rules. The 4th group went, then the 5th. We were down to the last cluster when the hangar changed again. The scrubbers hiccuped and then recovered, but the room noticed, and motion noticed sound, and cause noticed effect. An infected near the bleachers let out a long sound that wasn't a scream. It was an exhale held too long. It was a tired person's patience wearing through. Others picked it up, not because they were a choir, but because their bodies were tired too. The sound filled H-14 like fog. You could hide in that kind of noise, but you could also drown in it. "Now," Annika said on the internal channel, and I think that word moved at the speed of light. We brought the last group to the tunnel. Rosa went last with Kenny because leaders go last, not first. That's a superstition and a truth. I was in the service corridor above by then with Officer Bennett, counting heads and marking a tally with pen on my forearm because phones die. The air felt cooler on my face and my ears rang from silence instead of noise. The keypad blinked. I looked at it like it might speak. We could have gone anywhere from that corridor. Kitchens, maintenance rooms, a sky bridge. But the only place I wanted to go was a door with a view of the outside. Freedom can be a service road, and it has been for me most of my adult life. We followed the hall to a set of double doors with small wired windows. Outside, a concrete world bathed in sodium light, empty of people. There was a crash gate to the AOA service road 100 yards away. If we could reach that gate, we could find a checkpoint where a person with authority would look at our faces and decide we were worth far more than a chain. The double doors were locked, but not with new chains. They were coded for badge access. Mine didn't work because that door wasn't on my profile, but Officer Bennett's did, because his world was every door. He looked at me like a person about to break a rule, and that made me trust him more. He keyed us through. We moved into a night that felt like day because everything was lit too brightly. The air outside had a different mineral taste. We got 20 people through before a set of proximity alarms started chiming in the corridor behind us. Not loud, but sharp enough to mark us. Maybe someone keyed in from the other end. Maybe a camera read motion. Inside, Rosa and Kenny had their hands on the last person in the tunnel. The infected in the hangar had shifted again toward the vacuums and the fan and our moving silhouettes. It would take very little for the balance to fall the wrong way. I went back to the grate and took the last 2 kids under the arms and lifted them in a move my back will hate me for in 10 years. Rosa slid out like a person who'd done this in 100 training scenarios. Kenny came last, a smear of dust on his cheek a kid would have teased him for on any normal day. We didn't run. People trip when they run. We moved like baggage does when you stack it right. Smooth, consistent, low profile. The service road had a gentle grade and noise carried. We used the belt loader trick one last time. This one parked just inside the door and left humming, and I shut the double doors softly and let them seal. The keypad blinked when it locked. If I'd been a different person, I might have said a prayer. Instead, I listened to my breath and counted it again. The crash gate was chain link with a big yellow crash bar that cut power to the magnetic lock when you hit it in an emergency. It was an emergency. Bennett hit it. The gate jumped and then let go with a thump that felt like the music starting at a wedding. We moved through in a line. A rented box truck rolled by on the service road with 2 airport workers in it who looked like deer. We waved. They waved. They kept going because they were part of a different plan. That was okay. We had our own now. We followed the road to an intersection marked by a stop sign that never sees a stop because service roads operate on mutual trust. Beyond it, a security checkpoint with plastic barriers and a tent like you see at races. A generator hummed. A portable light tower threw white on white. 2 people stood behind a folding table covered in forms and masks and bottles of sanitizer that by now were talismans. One wore a Port Authority vest, the other wore a polo with a logo that said Airport Operations. Their shoulders were set and their eyes were tired. They saw us and stepped forward, both hands visible, palms open. We told them where we'd been and how we'd come. Words came out simple because complex words do worse under stress. We told them who we had and who we did not, a list that will always be a stone in my pocket, and we told them our plan. Get to an area with ventilation and seating, space people, Call families, coordinate." The ops rep nodded like a person memorizing a dance. The Port Authority officer keyed a radio and said, "I need a doctor to the service checkpoint Charlie 3, and a set of numbers I didn't know the meaning of but respected." He didn't ask to see our badges first. We didn't talk about the ones we left. We couldn't, not yet. We did the thing the ramp teaches you. You handle the next step and trust the one behind you to stand on its own. We got people water. We separated those with signs into a new tent, and Dr. Chowdhury, who had come through the tunnel with us, put on new gloves and did what she'd trained to do even when training ran out. We wrote names on paper in block letters because that feels like saving someone from being erased. We charged a phone with the generator and made one call each, then handed the phone to the person with the most urgent look, then the next, and we kept the list moving because fairness is a resource too. When the sun broke the ridge of low clouds over the cargo city, it turned everything we'd done into memory. The hangar behind us was still sealed. There would be teams and plans with colored tabs and press briefings. There would be questions with edges that could cut. Those were not my problems yet. My problem was whether Kenny's back would seize up if he sat too long, whether Rosa had the cramps she always got standing 10 hours, whether the kid with the fixed plane had a parent to hand him to who wouldn't scare him worse than our masks did. My problem was whether my mom would answer right away or let it ring once so I could hear her voice on the second ring and know she was paying attention. We were given a patch of shade under a wingless shelter and told we could sit. I didn't want to sit. Sitting was a fall disguised as rest. Instead, I stood by the service road and watched tugs and fuelers and vans go by like a time-lapse of normalcy. The airport had learned to move again, while a part of it held very still to keep the rest safe. I understood that. I do hold for a living. It's just that hold had built a new definition overnight, and we'd had to live inside it. A man in a suit, airport director or someone close, came by with a notepad and a face that had shaved minutes before it had reason to. He asked for our names and roles, and then looked at each of us as if he were memorizing, not for HR, but for something human. "We'll get the rest out," he said, without specifying from where, when, or how. He believed it enough that I could borrow his belief for a while. Before noon, I found a quiet 10 seconds behind a generator and called my mom. I'd rehearsed what to say and then forgot all of it when her voice said my name the way only mothers say it. I told her I was okay, and the word okay did a lot of lifting. I told her to stay home and drink water and not to watch too much television because the television would start to think for her if she let it. I told her I'd call again when I could. She said she was making arroz con leche because that's what you make when bad weather comes through. And I laughed, and my laugh made Officer Bennett glance over and smile like he'd heard a story he liked. I would love to tell you that all the people we moved lived, that the infected softened with daybreak, that the hangar doors were unchained by a person with a clear mind and a clean plan. I can tell you this instead: we didn't leave anyone by mistake. We didn't pretend we had more room than we did. We didn't turn one another into problems when we were running low. We understood that a chain on a door can be a policy or a panic, but either way it's steel, and you have to work around steel with physics and patience, and sometimes with a path underneath no one has used in years. We used all three. They took our statements and our temperatures, and a photograph I didn't look at. They told us we might be called back to help, and we started to say we're ground, because we reflexively say what we are. Then we stopped, because in the last 12 hours we had been so many other things: builders, decoys, guides, shield bearers, the hands that lift children into a new space, that saying just one word felt like hiding. I walked back to the edge of the tarmac where a painted line said you weren't supposed to stand and looked across at Hangar 14. You couldn't see the chains from here, You could see a gull land on the roof and tilt its head as if listening for something inside. I thought about contacting ramp control and asking for a blessing to cross that line out of habit, and I smiled because habits keep you honest when nothing else does. "Lunch," Rosa said at my shoulder, holding out a plastic clamshell that held a sandwich that tasted like someone's good intentions. Kenny sat on a low barrier and stretched his back and blew out a breath that was half laugh. Officer Bennett checked the fit of his vest straps and rolled his shoulders like a boxer. Dr. Chowdhury closed her eyes for 3 seconds and opened them like a swimmer breaking the surface. Annika jogged up from a call with Ops, hair pulled back with an elastic someone had handed her because hers had snapped, and she said, "Okay, we're going to be needed again." We stood, because that's what you do on a ramp. The world arrives with 200 wheels and 32 doors, and a noise that tells you physics is taking someone apart and you put them back together again. One bag, one cart, one person at a time. We had built a path under a chain, and we could build another if someone asked us to. I adjusted my high-vis vest and checked that my badge was still in its clip because I didn't want to give security another thing to worry about. I checked my pockets for the bolt cutters I'd started to think of as a companion. They were gone, back where they belonged, heavy in a cage, waiting for someone with a different problem. It's late now, as I tell this, and the airport is doing what airports do, even when the world pretends it isn't. It's sending and receiving. H-14 is still H-14. The largest echo on a part of the field no one thinks about until they have to. There are chain links that have learned the pattern of light on steel, and there are tire marks on the service road in a shape that, if you squint, looks like handwriting left by a big hand. Somewhere, a boy is holding a toy plane with a repaired wing that pulls a little to the left, and he's compensating without thinking because that's what flyers do. Somewhere, a clipboard has my name spelled correctly for once. Somewhere, a list includes the ones we couldn't bring this time, and next to each name there's a mark that means something different in every language and the same in the one that matters. We see you. I'm a night shift baggage handler reassigned to special cargo. I never want to hear that phrase again, and I'll answer to it any time they call. If the question is, do we have a way around the chain? The answer is yes, because you can always find a tunnel if you know how to look under the floor. If the question is, will the doors open? The answer is maybe not today and maybe not tomorrow, but maybe when the person with the right keys arrives and understands that the people inside are still moving and still themselves. If the question is, what do you do when the hangar isn't secure? I think you know the answer now. You build, you lift, you map, you breathe, you go. And when you get to the other side, you hold the door as long as you can. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.